Greetings and welcome to Train Signal. You're watching Getting Ready to Install Microsoft Lync Server 2013. In this video presentation, we're going to be taking a look at a lot of the steps that are required to set up Microsoft Lync Server. We're going to start off with an installation process overview, so we should have a really good understanding of what's involved with setting up Microsoft Lync Server. We'll also take a look at the infrastructure and your system requirements, your file server requirements, your Active Directory requirements, and your SQL Server requirements. At the end of this video presentation, we're going to introduce certificate infrastructure requirements and your DNS server requirements. And then we'll wrap up this video with a demonstration on setting up DNS and preparing your forest for Microsoft Lync. In order to install Microsoft Lync Server 2013, you have to go through several different steps. The install for Lync Server is not like a lot of the other products that you may be used to, where you just throw your DVD into the tray, you run setup, and then when you're done you have a product which is installed. With Lync Server 2013, we typically go through a planning process. We then architect our design inside of a tool called the Topology Builder. You publish that topology information over to your SQL Server environment called CMS, and then you can start the deployment of your servers, but we also have to prepare our environment before we even get to that point. So let's take a look at a detailed breakdown of all these different steps. In order to initiate the deployment of Microsoft Lync Server, I would typically start this process on a machine that's joined into my Active Directory-based environment, a domain joined system. On your domain joined system, you would run the installation program set up from the Microsoft Lync installation media. Now, you don't have to worry about this program installing Microsoft Lync. It's not going to do that. But what it is going to do is provide you access to the Lync Server 2013 Deployment Wizard, which is a software designed to aid in the process of deploying Lync within your environment. It's a wizard that walks you through the installation process step by step. From inside of the Deployment Wizard, you're going to see a link that allows you to install a tool called the Topology Builder. The Topology Builder is the tool that you use to architect your Lync environment. So you have to author a topology of how you want your Lync environment set up before you can even set up your Lync servers. Once you have deployed the Topology Builder, you'll then be able to go in and start defining your sites, your pools, your servers, and a lot of the configuration that's going to be required. The process of defining your topology inside of the Topology Builder is typically referred to as authoring your topology. From inside of your Lync Server 2013 Deployment Wizard, you're also going to see an option that allows you to prepare your Active Directory-based environment for the deployment of Lync. We're going to see a complete demonstration on how to do this, but at this point keep in mind that you have to extend your Active Directory schema by creating new object and attribute classes for Lync. You also have to prepare your forest, and that's going to create universal security groups and roles used by Microsoft Lync's role-based access control for security. We also have to prep up any domains that are going to have clients serviced by Lync, or any domains that will be hosting Lync servers. When you prepare your domains, it's going to be modifying access control lists so that the Microsoft Lync servers will be able to do their job. At the end of the forest, domain, and schema preparation process, you would then typically go in and define your Lync administrators, your CS administrators within your environment. Once you have your topology all designed, you can then publish your topology. In the case of the Enterprise Edition of Microsoft Lync Server, you're going to publish your topology to a back-end SQL Server database. The Enterprise Edition of Lync does require a full working version of SQL. Don't worry about the details, we're going to cover those in just a few minutes. If you're installing Microsoft Lync Server on the Standard Edition of Lync, you have to prepare your server in advance for the publishing of the topology to CMS by setting up a local instance of SQL Server 64-bit Express Edition. And there's a link inside of the Deployment Wizard that allows you to do this. So when you publish your topology, you're taking the information that you've architected inside of your Topology Builder, and you're pushing that information over into SQL Server. When you're ready to install one of your Lync servers, you take a machine that's joined into the Active Directory environment, which here we're calling a Lync system. From within that Lync server, you would run the setup program for Microsoft Lync, which once again is going to launch the Deployment Wizard for you. Before you can install the Lync server, you have to install the core components for Microsoft Lync, and you also have to have your local instance of SQL Server 64-bit Express Edition. From inside of the Deployment Wizard, there'll be an option to install Microsoft Lync Server, and one of the first things that we have to do is we have to prepare for our local copy of CMS. Every Microsoft Lync server within your environment is going to get a copy of the Central Management Store, which stores a lot of information regarding our topology and our policy configurations. So in the case of the Enterprise Edition of Lync, we've got a back-end SQL server which hosts CMS, but every server gets a local copy, a read-only copy. You have to pull a copy of CMS down locally to your server before you can run the install. The install is kind of like a scripted install, but instead of using a script file, your machine looks to its local copy of CMS to see how it's supposed to be installed. So our next step is retrieving a copy of the topology locally. Once you've installed a copy of CMS locally on your Lync server to be, you can then run the installation of Microsoft Lync, which installs your Lync components. Now, before you install your Lync server and then power it up, we also have to take into consideration certificates. Your Lync server requires a certificate or possibly multiple certificates depending upon the server role that we're deploying and how your environment is set up. Once you have your certificates installed, your next step would be starting up your services. And then we want to make sure that our services and everything was working properly, so we'd validate the installation. We can verify that our services are running by opening up our services console. We can also go into our control panel for Microsoft Lync and go into our topology and make sure that our services are responding in there also. Once the services look like they're running properly, we then start to configure and test out the system. Let's take a deeper look at our SQL server. As we're deploying Microsoft Lync server, we have to have SQL Server set up within our environment, whether it's for a backend SQL Server in the case of the Enterprise Edition pool, or a local instance of SQL for your local copy of CMS hosted on your servers participating within your Lync environment. With the standard edition of Microsoft Lync server, all of your applications and services run locally on a box, including your local instance of SQL Server. With the Enterprise Edition of Microsoft Lync server, we end up with a central focal copy of CMS on a backend SQL server, a full working version of SQL. And every Microsoft Lync server gets a read-only copy of CMS. When you deploy your topology, you have to define where the central management server role runs. This is in one of your pools in the forest, and it handles the updates to the database and the replication to the other servers getting a read-only copy. Let's take a look at the database requirements for the central management store, whether for the backend SQL server or for each local instance of CMS running on your Lync servers. Whether you're talking about your backend database for a front-end pool, a persistent chat server database, archiving or monitoring server databases, or even the persistent chat compliance database. In all of these instances, we can use Microsoft SQL Server 2008 R2 Enterprise Edition 64-bit exclusively. We can also use SQL Server 2008 R2 Standard Edition. Microsoft now also supports Microsoft SQL Server 2012 Enterprise Edition 64-bit exclusively, and we also have support for SQL Server 2012 Standard Edition. In all cases of your backend SQL Server, Microsoft recommends running the latest service packs. As we had mentioned, every Microsoft Lync server will maintain a local copy of CMS. Microsoft SQL Server 2012 Express Edition 64-bit is automatically installed by Microsoft Lync Server 2013 on each of your servers. So as you're going through the deployment process and you pull a copy of CMS locally down to your machine from within the deployment wizard, SQL Server is going to get installed to your local machine. You also want to remember that with Microsoft Lync Server 2013, Microsoft now supports SQL Server mirroring, so we can now provide redundancy in our database content. With Lync Server 2010, the prior version of Lync, we didn't have native support for SQL mirroring. We did have the ability to use clustering, but setting up SQL clustering across two separate physical locations with stretched VLANs could prove to be very challenging and possibly expensive. Before we deploy Microsoft Lync Server 2013 out at Carve Rock Fitness, let's take a look at preparing the infrastructure in our systems for Lync. You're going to find that the hardware requirements are going to be very similar for front-end servers, back-end servers, standard edition servers, and for your persistent chat servers. The recommended processor support is 64-bit dual processor hex core, 2.2 GHz or higher, and Microsoft is not supporting Intel Itanium processors for any of your Lync server roles. The amount of memory allocated or recommended for Lync Server 2013 is 32 GB. You'll notice that that's been increased since that of the Lync Server 2010 product. It's about double. Microsoft also recommends 8 or more 10,000 RPM hard disk drives with at least 72 GB of free space for your operating system and for your data content. The recommended design is to have your operating system set up in a RAID 1 array, mirroring, and then we have at least another 6 disks set up in a RAID 10 array for performance and also redundancy. Solid-state drives are also supported. For the networking support, You want to have at least one dual port network adapter, 1 gigabit per second or higher. Now let's take a look at the hardware requirements for the edge servers, the standalone mediation servers, and the director server roles. Keep in mind that these servers don't do quite as much as your front-end servers or your standard edition servers. For the CPU recommendation, we have 64-bit dual processors, quad-core, 2.0 GHz or better. The recommended memory is 16 gigabytes of memory per system. And Microsoft recommends 4 or more 10,000 RPM disk drives for each of your servers. You also want to have at least 72 gig of free disk space on your drives. And once again, for your networking, you want to have at least a minimal 1 dual port network adapter, 1 gigabit per second or higher. As we go through the process of defining our topology within the topology builder, for the Enterprise Edition of Microsoft Lync Server, we also have to define a file server, or more specifically a file share, on the network that's used by your servers participating within the pool. The file share is used by your Enterprise Edition servers within a pool to share content across the pool, such as application content that runs on all of the servers within the pool. If you're deploying the Standard Edition of Microsoft Lync Server, the Standard Edition of Lync uses a local directory for its local file storage. With the Enterprise Edition of Lync, we have to have a shared file storage for the servers participating within the pool, and that's a network file share. The Lync Server 2013 setup program requires that the permissions on the shared folder allow full access to the administrator. The Lync Server 2013 installation program will define the ACLs on the folder structure as part of the install process. Lync Server 2013 supports using file shares on directly attached storage using Storage Area Network SAN solutions, and it's also supported to use the distributed file system for a higher level of availability and redundancy. To provide a higher level of availability for an instance of a share, you can also consider using clustered file shares. It's also recommended to store your file share on a RAID array so that you have redundancy on your disk storage level. In order to support the installation of Microsoft Lync Server within your forest, we have certain requirements for this that have to be met. The simplest of designs is a single forest with a single domain, and that's what we have at Carverock Fitness. You can also have multiple domains within the same forest, whether they're in the same domain tree or not. Just keep in mind that if you have multiple domains, you're going to have to prep each of your domains that will host clients or Lync servers. We can also set up Lync Server in an environment where we have cross-forest trust relationships. So whether you have multiple forests with a central forest topology, or possibly you have multiple forests with a resource forest topology. In either case, it's going to require forest trust relationships where the user accounts are in a trusted environment. It also requires directory replication between your forests. As for the operating system version running on your domain controllers, Windows Server 2003 or greater. And this can be 2003 32-bit or 64-bit editions of the product. So you can have 2003, 2003 R2, Windows Server 2008, whether it's the Enterprise Edition 32-bit or maybe you've got the 64-bit edition. We have the 2008 R2 operating system and also Windows Server 2012. So the bottom line is, as long as you have Windows Server 2003 for your server-based operating system for AD, on all of your domain controllers and global catalog servers, you should be good to go. The minimum functional level for your domains for Lync support is Windows Server 2003. So all the domains in which you deploy Lync Server have to be raised up to at least Windows Server 2003, 2008, or possibly 2008 R2. Your forest also has to be raised up to at least Windows Server 2003. So once again, your cutoff is Windows Server 2003, but you can also have it raised up to 2008 or 2008 R2. To be able to install Microsoft Lync Server on a Windows Server 2008 server or a 2012 based server, we have certain software requirements that have to be met. For the operating system, Windows Server 2008 R2, SP1 or newer. This is the cutoff level for support for all of your Lync Server roles. It's also supported for SQL Server, your file servers, and also for your domain controllers, as we've just mentioned. Another one of our requirements is Windows Management Framework 3.0's PowerShell 3.0. When you deploy the Windows Management Framework, you should have the Windows PowerShell 3.0 installed as part of that. Another very important component that you cannot forget about is your .NET Framework 4.5. you can download the .NET Framework 4.5 from the Microsoft Download Center. If you're installing on Windows Server 2012, after the installation of your .NET Framework 4.5 is completed, you also have to go into the Server Manager and install HTTP Activation, which is a Server Manager feature. The Windows Identity Foundation is another component used by Microsoft Lync Server, which is provided to support server-to-server authentication within your Lync environment. This is required both on Windows Server 2008 R2 and Windows Server 2012. Both the Standard Edition and the Enterprise Edition of Microsoft Lync Server will both require Internet Information Services (IIS). When you install IIS on these servers, they're going to require several different modules which you can find out at TechNet. For example, you have to install the default document support, ASP.NET, ISAPI filters, HTTP logging, and tracing. That's just to name a few. For all of your front-end servers or Standard Edition servers that are going to have conferencing deployed, you also want to deploy your Windows Media Format runtime. This is used to play your audio, such as playing your WMA files. It's used by CallPark, the announcement application, and also by your response group application for automated call distribution. If the installation detects that this is not installed, it will install it for you, but it will require a reboot. Another server management feature that may be required in your environment is called Microsoft Message Queuing. This is used by Microsoft Lync persistent chat front-end servers. It's also used by the Microsoft Lync Server archiving and monitoring servers support. Another topic that can be very complex with Microsoft Lync Server is certificates. When we look at our certificate infrastructure requirements, you have to remember that the Lync Server uses certificates for a lot of forms of authentication between clients and servers. And we can use a combination of internal private certificates and also public trusted certificates. So depending upon the server role and the type of clients or servers connecting to it, will dictate what type of a server certificate we're getting or applying to that server. Let's take a look at a couple of examples of what certificates are used for with Lync Server 2013. First of all, we have client-to-server-based connectivity with TLS. Certificates are also used for mutual TLS from server to server. We also use certificates out in our DMZ for the reverse proxy server and also for our Edge server. So it's supporting connections coming in by federated users, remote users, and instant messaging users out on the internet. The Access Edge service running on your Edge server out in your DMZ provides support for clients connecting in over port 443 with a secure connection. But the Access Edge service can also support federation relationships coming in over port 5061 by default. This allows us to set up federation relationships with other organizations so we can have trust relationships between our Lync environments and their Lync environments. Certificates are used to support clients connecting in externally for a conference connection, coming in through the reverse proxy and through the Edge server in the DMZ. Certificates are also used by the Microsoft Lync Server to provide support for connectivity to the web services, such as when a client is downloading the address book, or when a client goes to join into a conference and they click on that meeting join URL. Another example would be when your client's running IP-based phones, connect to pull down a list of patches through the device update services. When you're designing your certificates for your Lync infrastructure, you want to take a look at the Lync Server 2013 planning tool. It will provide you with a lot of great information that can be useful when coming up with your certificate requirements, such as your certificate names. You typically want to make sure that you have certificates that will support subject alternative names, because Lync servers typically have to support many different names on the certificates. All of your server certificates also have to support server authorization. Your server certificates must contain a certificate revocation list distribution point, which is typically identified through a web-based URL. It's used by clients to verify if that certificate is still valid or if it has been revoked from the certificate authority. For any servers that are going to be using internal private certificates coming from an internal trusted CA, one that we're using inside of our organization exclusively, we can use auto-enrollment. Auto-enrollment is a feature that is supported by Microsoft's enterprise CAs. They allow you to push out certificates to machines or users by using Active Directory group policy objects. The key length recommended by Microsoft is 2048, but 1024 and 4096 are also supported. The default hashing algorithm supported by Microsoft is RSA, but there's also support for ECDH P256, P384, and P521 hashing algorithms. In order to host Lync Server 2013 within an organization, you have to design and set up your DNS infrastructure to support the product. Now, once again, this can be a very complex topic, and it's a great area where you want to use the Lync 2013 planning tool. So as I go through this demonstration, keep in mind that there are entries that I may not be providing here that you may require inside of your organization. So this is going to be a general high-level overview of some of the types of entries that you're going to possibly bump into. Inside of your DNS server, you're going to have to provide resolution for the name of your pool. So if I'm using the Enterprise Edition of Microsoft Lync, the name of my pool, such as pool.carverockfitness.com, is going to either have to map down to the virtual IP address of a hardware load balancing appliance if I'm using HLB to route the traffic to the servers behind it. If I'm using DNS-based load balancing, the name of my pool is going to have to map down to the IP address of each of the servers in a pool. So if I have 3 front-end servers, pool.carverockfitness.com will be added into DNS more than once for each server in the pool. It uses a combination of round-robin and technology developed into your clients, so it knows how to fail over based upon those round-robin responses. Each of your Microsoft Lync servers within your organization are also going to require a hostname record and a record inside of DNS. So this would include any of your pool servers, front-end servers, mediation servers, directors, and the internal interface of your edge servers. We use hostnames to resolve names to IP address mappings, and that's used extensively within the internal environment, from client to server to server, and even over from server back to your backend SQL servers. On our internal DNS server, we also have to provide name to IP address mappings for our simple URLs that we're using to connect over to the Microsoft Lync server. For dial-up access support, we have a dial-in simple URL, which is used to gain access to the dial-in conferencing webpage, which provides telephone numbers that we can use to dial into conferences. We also have a meet simple URL, which is used to join into meetings. So when you click on a link to join into a meeting, it connects you over to a meet simple URL. We also have the administrative simple URL, which is used for connecting over to administer Microsoft Lync by connecting to the control panel. For clients inside of the organization, the simple URLs will typically route us over to the front-end pools. If we're using the Enterprise Edition of Microsoft Lync Server, and we install multiple servers within a pool, which is what we would do, if you were using hardware-based load balancing for all of the traffic to the pool, we could use the same name for all of the traffic going over to the pool, including your media streaming traffic, your SIP traffic, as well as your web traffic. Well, if you're using DNS-based load balancing, you have to use hardware-based load balancing for your web-based traffic. In the case of DNS load balancing, it forces us to use a different name for our web-based traffic, and we route that traffic through a virtual IP address on the hardware load balancing appliance. So as a result of this, if I'm using DNS-based load balancing, I'm going to have to come up with another name that's going to route traffic over to the hardware load balancing appliance for the web-based traffic. As you define your internal DNS, we also have records that can be used by your clients for auto-discovery. Whether it's software-based clients, such as your Lync 2010 client, your Lync 2013 clients, or maybe even the legacy Lync 2010 attendant. When you're defining your internal DNS, one of the things that we cannot forget about is our clients. And your clients have the ability to auto-discover how to connect into the Lync environment. They can locate the servers that can authenticate and register them through auto-discovery of DNS records. This includes your software-based clients like your Lync client, your legacy Lync attendant, or your legacy Lync client. It also includes your IP-based phones running your Lync Phone Edition. With your Lync Phone Edition clients on your network, we also have certain DNS records that are required by these devices. DNS records that can be used for auto-discovery for authentication and registration, DNS records that can be used to locate the time sync service on the network, and DNS records that can be used for locating the device update services where those devices can pull down their patches. In this next diagram, we see an example of client traffic connecting into your front-end pool coming in through a hardware load balanced appliance. You can route your traffic over to the front-end pool through a hardware load balancing appliance for all of your traffic. So this would include your web-based traffic, your SIP traffic, and your media streaming traffic from your clients. If you're using HLB for all of the traffic, so when a client goes to connect over to the front-end pool, the client has to connect over to a name that's mapping down to the virtual IP address of the hardware load balancer. So in our case, it would be something like pool.carverockfitness.com. If you're using a hardware load balancer for all of the traffic, you can use the same exact name for your pool that you're going to use for your web-based traffic. With your web-based traffic, we don't have the ability to use DNS-based load balancing for that support. So in this second diagram, you see an example where I'm using DNS load balancing for SIP and media traffic, but when it comes to my web-based traffic, I have to use a different name for that. So if I'm using pool.carveroutfitness.com, DNS traffic getting routed over to my pool. So if I'm using the name pool.carveroutfitness.com for my SIP and media traffic, and I'm using DNS load balancing, I'm going to have to come up with another name that I'm going to use for the web-based traffic. Before we end the presentation and go into our demonstration, I'd like to provide you with a couple of DNS records that you're likely to bump into with your Lync design. The first entry I have here is a host A record. Well, I've actually provided more than one host record. I've got pool.carveroutfitness.com being added to my DNS server more than once. This would be an example of using DNS round robin, or what we call DNS load balancing. It's actually using round robin on the back end with load balancing technology built into your client. If I was using hardware load balancing for my SIP and media traffic, I would only have to provide one entry that would route over to the VIP of my hardware load balancing appliance. But you'll notice here that I'm using pool.carveroutfitness.com more than once, and each of these host records would map down to a different IP address. Each one would map down to an IP address of one of the servers in the pool. If I'm using DNS load balancing, I would also have to come up with an internal web services URL that would route traffic through the virtual IP address of my hardware load balancing appliance. So here you can see that I have an example of a host A record for linkinternalweb.carveroutfitness.com. And again, that would map down to the VIP of my hardware load balancing appliance. The third entry I have is my front-end servers. The front-end servers have to have their host names mapped down to IP addresses, just like other servers on your network. So I have a host entry for front-end server 1, front-end server 2, and front-end server 3.carveroutfitness.com. You can also see some examples of my simple URLs. I have my Meet Simple URL, which is used for joining into meetings, my Dial-In Simple URL for gaining access to the Dial-In conferencing webpage, and my Admin Simple URL, which is used for gaining access to the administration console, my control panel. These three URLs would typically map down to the pool, the front-end pool. If you're a client inside of the organization, you can gain access to this functionality by connecting directly over to the front-end pool. If you're a client outside of the organization, the Dial-In URL in your Meet Simple URL would typically route you in through a reverse proxy. Administration isn't allowed from outside of the organization typically, so the admin URL typically doesn't apply. Here you can see some more examples of DNS records that you're likely to find in a Lync environment. The first example is a service advertisement record _SIP internal TLS._TCP.carveroutfitness.com. This would typically map down to port 5061 and to the host or to the pool providing the service. This is used by your legacy clients for auto discovery. Now, your Lync clients, your new Lync 2013 client, likes to use a Lync Discover internal host record. Well, it's actually an alias record that would map over to your pool. So, whereas with Lync Server 2010, it would use the first entry, the SRV record, your Lync Server 2013 client would actually prefer to use that Lync Discover internal record. Keep in mind that your clients are not limited to one entry. For example, the new Lync Server 2013 client would prefer to use Lync Discover internal.carveroutfitness.com, but if I don't have that record inside of DNS, it could use the legacy SRV auto discovery record. We also have another example of an SRV record, a service advertisement record, that's advertising the time sync server on the network, which is used by your Lync Phone Edition clients. So the example I have is _ntp._udp.carveroutfitness.com, and this would map down to port 123 and then the server providing the service. There's also an example of a host record that's used by your IP-based devices, clients running Lync Phone Edition, for obtaining their patches. We have the UC updates-r2.carveroutfitness.com. Your clients running Lync Phone Edition would use this entry to get information on where to connect to pull down their patches. Well, to pull down the listing of available patches. And they typically connect over port 443, but they pull down their patches over port 80. This entry would typically route your clients over to your front-end pool. We have another host record, sip.carveroutfitness.com, that can be used by your Lync Phone Edition clients for auto discovery, again used for registration and authentication. The final record that we have is our SQL backend server. You can't forget that if you have the Enterprise Edition of Lync, we have to have resolution so we can connect over to our backend SQL server. Let's take a look at a demonstration. In this demonstration, we're going to see how to configure the internal Carve Fitness environment for DNS. And we're also going to see how to prepare our Active Directory environment for the installation of Microsoft Lync by prepping our schema, our forest, and our domain. In this demonstration, we're going to see how to set up the DNS to support the Lync environment at Carve Fitness. I've just switched over to my domain controller, which also is hosting my DNS. We're going to open up our DNS Administrative Console. We'll expand our forward lookup zones. And here you can see that we have a zone for carverockfitness.com. At Carve Fitness, we're going to have 3 front-end servers in a pool, and the pool is called pool.carverockfitness.com. Let's create the host records for each of the servers within the pool. Keep in mind that we're going to be using DNS-based load balancing for the pool. So here we're going to create a new host record. We'll call it pool. And then down below, we're going to provide the IP address of the server within the pool. And in my case, it's 10.0.0.30. We'll click on Add Host. We'll add the entry again, put in the IP address of the second front-end server in the pool, 10.0.0.31, and then finally we'll add the name pool one more time. And here we have 10.0.0.32, and we'll click on Add Host. So as you can see here, if clients try to connect over to pool.carverockfitness.com, they're going to be able to connect over to any one of these 3 servers within the pool, and they connect over directly for SIP and your media streaming traffic. For clients connecting over any of the web-based services for the Microsoft Lync server pool, that traffic is going to have to go through hardware-based load balancing. You cannot use DNS-based load balancing for this. The name that I'm going to be using for my internal web services is linkinternalweb.carverockfitness.com. So here, let's create a new host record. And we have Lync int web for internal web services. And the IP address that I have is 10.0.0.45, which connects over to the VIP on my hardware load balancing appliance. We'll click on Add Host. So as you can see, for media traffic or SIP traffic, clients will be able to connect over to the pool directly with any one of these 3 IP addresses, but for the web-based traffic, it's going to have to go through the hardware-based load balancing appliance. And here we have the IP address of the VIP, the virtual IP address of the appliance that the traffic will route through. When my front-end servers power up, they should register inside of DNS, so I will end up having a name to IP address mapping or host record for each of the servers within the pool. So eventually I'm going to see frontend1.carverockfitness.com, frontend2.carverockfitness.com, and also frontend3.carverockfitness.com. For clients inside of my organization, they also have to be able to connect over to the Lync server for the simple URLs. We have a meet simple, a dial-in simple, and an administrative simple URL. Let's create each of those. So inside of the console, we'll provide the name for our meet simple URL. And ours is going to be meet.carverockfitness.com. And the IP address for this is going to route over to that internal web services VIP that we have on the hardware load balancing appliance. 10.0.0.45. We'll click on Add. We have our dial-in simple URL, and ours is going to be labeled dial-in. We'll point over to that same virtual IP address on the hardware load balancing appliance for web traffic. 10.0.0.45. And finally, we have our administrative simple URL, which we're calling ours admin.fabricam.com. And that also will point over to our hardware load balancing appliance IP address. We'll click on OK. Now you have to remember that if you're setting up IP devices, you would create a host record for UC updates -R2, and this record routes your clients over to the pool for the device update services by going through the VIP of the hardware load balancing appliance for web services. We would also create a host record for sip.carverockfitness.com, and that would route the clients directly over to the front-end pool. This is used for registration and authentication. Your Lync Phone Edition would also have an NTP SRV record, a service advertisement, which would point the clients over to an NTP server for time synchronization, typically over port 123. Let's take a look at a couple of other types of records that you're likely to see. The next record that we're going to create is an alias record used by the new Lync clients for auto discovery on the internal network. And the alias name that I'm going to use here is Lync Discover Internal. And the name itself is going to map down to another name that I already have inside of my database. pool.covrockfitness.com. The Lync Discover internal namespace is used by your new Lync 2013 client to auto-discover how to connect and register in the Lync environment if they're on the internal network. If the client isn't able to discover a Lync Discover internal namespace inside of DNS, they can look for a Lync Discover record, possibly for external connectivity. Your Lync 2013 clients can also use the SRV records like we used back with Lync Server 2010. Let's take a look at that. Underneath covrockfitness.com, I'm going to right-click, create a new other record type. We'll choose Service Location Record, SRV. Then here we specify the service, and in my case it's going to be _SIP internal TLS. The protocol that I'm using is TCP, so here I provide _TCP. The port that we're going to use for connectivity is port 5061, and the host offering this service is the front-end pool itself, pool.covrockfitness.com. And then we'll click on OK. And then we'll click on Done. Just as a reminder, before we close out of this demonstration, you want to take a look at the Microsoft Lync Server 2013 planning tool. The planning tool can be a very useful aid in coming up with the necessary records that you require for both your internal and your external DNS. Let's close out of the DNS administration console, and next we'll take a look at preparing Active Directory for the installation of Lync Server 2013. In the second part of our demonstration, we're going to take a look at preparing the Active Directory environment for the installation of Lync Server 2013. I've just switched over to a machine that is domain joined, and the machine has the Microsoft Lync Server 2013 CD mounted, the DVD media on the D drive. So let's go over here to my D drive. I have setup, AMD 64, and there's my setup utility. In order to run the software on the CD, I require the Microsoft Visual C++ 2012 x64 minimum runtime. I'm going to click on yes, that's actually included with the installation media. Next we're prompted for the location that we're going to install Lync to. And it reads, to install Lync Server 2013 core components and start the deployment, click on Install. Well, here you'll notice that I'm using my C drive, Program Files, Microsoft Lync Server 2013 as my installation directory. We'll click on Install. We'll accept a licensing agreement, then click on OK. You can see that the Microsoft Lync Server 2013 core components are being installed. And then the Microsoft Lync Server deployment wizard opens up. Now, what we're concerned with is preparing Active Directory for the installation of Microsoft Lync Server. Before you can deploy Lync Server within your environment, you have to extend your Active Directory schema, so you prep your schema. We also have to prepare the forest and the domains. You can see that my system is currently checking out the deployment state. It's querying for information so it knows how the environment is currently configured, or in our case, not configured. So we're ready to prepare Active Directory, so we're going to click on the link. And you can see that it walks me through the preparation process step by step. In step number 1, we prepare the schema. This is a process that is going to extend your Active Directory schema. It's going to create brand new object classes and attribute classes inside of AD. In order to extend your Active Directory schema, you have to have elevated credentials in AD. For example, Enterprise Administrator / Schema Administrators. In larger environments, you may have to have your AD administrators perform this action for you. Here, I'm going to click on Run. We'll click on Next. You can see the commandlet that's running, install-cs AD server schema. And we'll let that run for a moment. Now you can see that it's finished preparing the schema. You can click on Finish. You can also view the logs to see what has actually happened. And we're going to close out of there. In step number 2, you verify the replication of your schema partition. If you just modified your Active Directory schema, the schema changes have to replicate to your other domain controllers within your environment. In my demonstration environment, there's really nothing to check because I'm using a single domain controller. Step number 3, we prepare the current forest. Run once per deployment, it creates global settings and universal groups for Lync server components. Well, what this is going to do is create universal security groups that are used by Microsoft Lync Server for role-based access control and other purposes. I'm going to run this, and remember that I'm an enterprise administrator. I have top-level administrative access throughout the forest right now. So I'm going to click on Run, click on Next. Down below, you specify where you want your universal security groups to get created. I'm going to use my local domain. And then you can see that I have the enable-cs AD forest commandlet, which is running. Once again, we'll click on Finish. And if you want to look at the prerequisites that are necessary to run this, you can see here I'm logged on as an enterprise admin. And my PC is part of the domain environment. It's a member of the root domain of the forest. Step number 4, we verify the replication of the global catalogs. Once again, I've only got a single domain controller for my demonstration purposes, so I have nothing to check. So we'll go to step number 5, which is preparing my current domain. When you prepare the current domain, you run this once per each domain that either hosts Lync clients or Lync servers. And it's going to modify the access control lists. It defines ACE's access control entries that are going to allow the Microsoft Lync server environment to be able to do its job. Here, we're going to click on Run. This would require that you're a domain admin to run this. Here, we'll click on Next. And then Finish. And you'll notice the commandlet enable-cs AD domain. If I look at the prerequisites, you only have to be a domain admin for this one, as opposed to being the enterprise admin or a schema admin. Once again, in step number 6, in a multi-domain environment, or in an environment where you have multiple domain controllers or possibly sites with links connecting them together, you may have to verify that your replication has occurred. So for us, we don't have to worry about that, but let's take a look at step number 7. Step number 7 is really kind of a reminder to let you know that now that you've gone out and you've created these universal security groups, you would go in and define your new Lync administrators, your CS administrators. So here with step number 7, it's a reminder to go take a look at the universal group called CS administrator and to add your administrators into that group. So here, let's go back to the deploy link. I'm going to exit out of here. And from inside of the run line, we'll type dsa.msc. This opens up Active Directory's users and computers. Underneath my users container, you can see that I now have a bunch of universal security groups. Here's my CS administrator. We'll click on Members, Add. We'll click OK, and click OK again. So we now have Active Directory all prepared and ready for the installation of Microsoft Lync Server. So we can then move on to the process of creating our topology and publishing it. I hope you've enjoyed the demonstration, and we'll see you in the next video.